Okay, hey everyone, it's Give the Nutritionist here, and today is going to be a video I've been wanting to do for quite a long time. I'm talking about maybe a good year, maybe 6 months. I've been busy with trying to help people with all sorts of things, right? Like type 2 diabetes, vitamin A toxicity, heavy metals and mold, and you can name it, right? Recently with nickel toxicity and glyphosate and how to basically create a general guide for people to get healthier. So today now I want to tackle veterans. And I think it's important that when veterans come back home, that we love them, we take care of them, and we do what we can for them because they sacrifice a big portion of their life, right? Whether you sign up for one tour or 10 tours, doesn't matter to me. The whole point is you're willing to put your life on the line to protect us and to do things the average person would probably never ever do in their life, right? So again, right, there's honor, there's merit, and I highly respect veterans. And now we gotta help them. I think it's crazy how veterans come home and we do what we can, but it wasn't enough. The big one is PTSD. And when people are serving, right, whether you have an office job, whether you're assigned to do ground crew work, or whether you're combat arms, whatever, right? There's a lot of jobs in the military. Some people come back and they're normal, they're fine, and they're not affected. Some people, for whatever reasons, right, they come back with invisible wounds. Wounds you can't really see, but it affects their psyche, it affects their mental health, it affects how they live their daily life. Some people come back from, service and they're not the same people as they were. Hopefully because they've grown as people and they're better Americans, better citizens. But sometimes people come back and they're deeply afflicted. They have mental health issues and we need to help them. And for as much as therapy and psychological services can be of great help to our veterans, we're missing a piece. And the piece is we need to bridge together heavy metals, exposures to being, in the military. Because think about it, when you're in the military, there's a lot of things you're exposed to that, isn't good for you, isn't organic. You're the military, right? You're trying to kill people, and the things used to kill people aren't, clean, right? Like, there's no clean death. So, what I want to do in this video is I want to go over a lot of things military members may have been exposed to, what might have caused them to have certain issues when they came back. Because maybe it's not even PTSD, right? Maybe it's going to be, a physical problem. Maybe it's going to be a disease or cancer or something, right? And I at least want to lay down some foundation so our veterans can understand, okay, yes, this is true. I was on a C-130, I was a gunner, and we're exposed to all these, toxic metals, because we're shooting all these shells. We're shooting, what, 100,000 rounds per minute, and then you're shooting munitions, and as you shoot it, you breathe in that stuff, right? That's not good for you. For some people, ground crews, they get, higher risk of cancer, especially pilots too. So it's about taking a holistic look at things, right? Because maybe it wasn't Camp Lejeune water, right? Maybe it wasn't exactly a burn pit. Maybe just some kind of exposure to certain things in the military made you sick. Okay, so I'm going to start off the article, and again, right, please like and share this with anyone who's a former veteran or is still in the service, because my whole goal here, right, is when veterans are done in the service, whether they, had combat arm roles or went to a battlefield or, or part of something that could have been, a health hazard, right? I want people to go to the doctor and, do some kind of metal chelation, right? Because they could have toxic heavy metals causing their issues. They could have a lack of what's that term? They have a lack of cysteine, right? Because a lot of these metals will, take away thiol groups, right? Which is cysteine. So a lot of people are gonna have problems trying to make their own, glutathione. And if you can't make glutathione, you're gonna have trouble with keeping down inflammation. You're gonna have more oxidative stress that could, in many different cases, become different diseases, different issues. And I just want to patch everything together in some sort of weird quilt that at least if you watch this as a member, you can make some connections and draw upon them, and then you can go from there. All right, so let's start off. So first of all, right, from the water you drink, Camp Lejeune, not all water is going to be, clean. The air you breathe, you're shooting guns, you're shooting munitions, the air you breathe isn't going to be that clean, burn pits especially. The gear you wear, you're spraying it full of pesticides and other things so you don't get bitten. And the weapons you fire, you'll be surprised at the amount of heavy metals you'll find in your ammo and the munitions. Because again, right, you can make an explosion, right? That's the whole point of what weaponry is. And exposed to constant chemical environment that extends far beyond the battlefield. Because it could just be, at a base camp, all the way, out there when you're deployed. So when people think about the cost of war, they think about visible injuries, like you see a gunshot wound, bleeding out, nasty wounds, shrapnel shards from a, explosion, a lost limb, you lose an arm, a leg, a finger, something, right? Or maybe even death. But for a lot of veterans, they come back, the wounds are invisible, and those are even harder to care for because you don't know what you're looking for. You know something's wrong, but you don't know what it is exactly. And these wounds aren't necessarily caused by combat, but by gradual, consistent exposure to toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and environmental hazards encountered from base life to battlefield. Now, these things don't act in isolation, right? No one's going to have a single toxicity. It's usually going to be a multivariate form of different heavy metals, different exposures to different chemicals, and so on. So the thing is, it affects your body. It affects your metabolism, it affects your brain chemistry, it affects the way your organs function. And the thing is, there's a war inside your body for some veterans when they come home that they're still fighting a battle. And the battlefield never truly ends because, again, right, everything's affecting your health even when you come back home. So my point of the article is we're going to explain what toxic exposures are, how these exposures can affect your body, and what we should do about it. And I want to say just quickly, right, the way you should do about it is going to be in part 2. And that's going to come next week, if I try pretty hard to make it come. Part 2, coming soon. Because again, it's real big, and I just want to lay down foundation. I can't do everything all at once, because it'll be a really long video, and, I know some people have TikTok brain, and they want something quick, right? So in general, right, veterans are exposed to a stacked burden of toxins, depending on your job, right? Some jobs are in an office, and you're cool. Some jobs are, a little dirty, right? So you may be exposed to the following, right? Heavy metals: lead, mercury, uranium, tungsten, nickel, beryllium, strontium, aluminum, copper, and antimony. Now, from shooting, 9mm to 7.62 to using a rotary cannon where you're shooting a ton of ammo all at once, right? Whether you're shooting bigger shells like 20, 25, 30 millimeters, whether you're going to be, using, maybe let's say you're a tanker, right? And you're shooting sabots and heat rounds and all sorts of things, right? Just by shooting the munition, right, you got to have that spark, and then, you breathe in, what that stuff is. And that stuff can be pretty toxic, right? And maybe you don't make the connection or you don't know about it, right? But all these things are, in some way, some kind of explosion. And when this explosion happens, right, and it mixes with the material and the metals to have that combustion, it aerosolizes this thing, right? So you're breathing it in. And it's very small. It's like below 2.5, is it micrometers? Right? So again, the point is you're getting it into your lungs, and it goes inside your body, and depending on other kinds of exposures, over time, right, this could be a big issue. For some people, it could not be an issue, right? It depends, right? We're all different. So whether, you're throwing grenades, popping C4, you've experienced IEDs, you're shooting motors, maybe you're experienced with a launcher, right? You're shooting a javelin, AT4. Maybe, you've been into the battlefield, right? Where, sometimes they drop JDAM, Sidebinders, GBUs, missiles, and, when missiles explode, the aftermath of that stuff is still there in the air in the area, right? So it's not going to be the cleanest air in a battlefield, right? Whether, you came after, a bombardment, or whether you were present in the Gulf War with the oil wells were on fire, you're breathing in things that you're not supposed to, right? Ideally. So, for example, right, let's say you were in a tank battalion, you're a crewman in a tank, and you're shooting sabot shells, right? So some sabot shells are made of tungsten, and some are made of depleted uranium. And the thing is, when you're shooting depleted uranium rounds, you're going to breathe in a little bit of uranium. So that could explain why some people may have cancer, right? Uranium oxide aerosols. If you're in a C-130 and you're shooting, all your cannons and stuff, I'm pretty sure it gets pretty dirty up there, right? Full of things you're shooting. So chances are you're heavily breathing in aerosolized heavy metals. And from what I've heard about some veterans, the people that, that are gunners on those ships, right, they tend to get cancer and different health issues. So, again, it's about putting connections together, right? Because I want people to understand, right, that the reality of modern weaponry It's not just about shooting something and it goes out, right? Right when you're shooting something, at the same time that ignition is near you and you're breathing it in. And the thing is, when that happens, right, you're inhaling every shot, every blast, every detonation that's going inside your body, right? Maybe it's not a lot in the beginning, but after a while and you're used to it, there's a good chance you have to begin, implementing certain things in the military, right? Like taking a lot of minerals to counteract these metals, like doing some saunas to sweat out these things, and eating healthier. And one of the issues with veterans, some of them, right, not all of them, of course, some of them are heavy drinkers, some of them they're smokers, and it's like, well, you got to stop doing that because you already have a lot of burden. Your body has to detox, and to just put more stuff on top of that, that's not helping you out. So I'm trying to help everyone gauge that connection about what might be causing some things, right? And I'm sure a lot of you are going to be reading this article, watching this video, and you'll be like, "Oh my God, that makes sense." There's a click, there's a light bulb going up, and this is why I'm doing this. I just want to kind of spread the message, the idea, so people can come to fruition on these things, right? So, what about the effects of heavy metals? So in a way, it kind of hijacks your brain's electrical system. It disrupts the chemistry. It erodes, the way your body's supposed to work, right? Your memory, your mood, your behavior. And I want to go through this to close the gaps in understanding of PTSD, right? Because trauma on its own needs a lot of help, right? Second of all, if you're messed up with heavy metals, that's going to make it harder for you to heal. Thirdly, if you're eating like crap and you're not having food that's rich in minerals and vitamins, full of proteins and fatty acids, and you're not, giving your body the nutritional resources to heal and get better, right? Then you can't, remove the heavy metals. And if you can't remove the heavy metals, then you can't go further in, healing the trauma from PTSD or even TBI in some cases, right? Traumatic brain injury. But again, right, we'll go over these things and maybe it'll click, right? So lead, right? You know, and guns, and gunpowder. It's everywhere, right? That might be the most common exposure. Is going to be lead, right? So there's a thing called calcium mimicry, where lead pretends to be like a calcium, and in the neurons it disrupts proper synaptic signaling, right? So your nerves that should have calcium, they're messed up with lead, and it's taking its place. Also, what happens is this inhibits delta aminolevinic dehydratase. This is a zinc-dependent enzyme which affects the way heme synthesis works, in which your body takes iron and it makes it into something usable. It also disrupts N-methyl-D-aspartic acid, NMDA receptors, and this strongly can affect your memory and learning. So if you're having trouble learning and your memory is kind of fading, and you're a relatively young man or woman, it could be lead that's still in your body, affecting you. This can damage your mitochondria, affecting your energy production to the neurons, because again, right, everything in your body needs energy to do stuff. So this disrupts your calcium, because it competes with it. You have less zinc, because you're trying to detox it. You have less iron, because again, your delta aminolevinic dehydratase is being inhibited. So if you have issues with your iron, your zinc is low, you have low testosterone, maybe you have issues with your bone, maybe you're kind of weak, that could be possible exposure to lead, right? And if you're feeling cognitive decline, lower IQ, you're very irritable, you're very aggressive, you can't pay attention as much as you used to anymore, and you're feeling, like pain, right, in your fingertips and in your toes, peripheral neuropathy, kind of like what diabetics have, that could be lead affecting your neurons. Moving on, mercury. The thing about mercury, right, is it binds to thiol groups like cysteine, disabling enzymes you need to make glutathione. And the thing is, eating glutathione, which is the master antioxidant in the body, it helps you to stop the inflammation from free radicals and non-radical oxidants. I bring up the whole thing with glutathione because not only is it good for the single electrons, but it's also good for non-radicals, which are requiring a 2-electron. So only, as far as I know, glutathione and catalase work on non-radicals. And non-radicals, if you don't take care of them, will cause more free radicals, which will then cause more oxidation, more inflammation, right? This can damage microtubes, causing neuronal structural damage. And as always, a lot of these things always impair your mitochondrial function, right? Which is why you might feel low energy, right? You do all you can and you're still, kind of weak and you feel less gumption to want to do things, right? and it's because of potential exposure to heavy metals. So you're gonna have less selenium because selenium is amazing for detoxing, mercury. You might have less zinc because again, you got to run your detox. Less sulfur because in a way, cysteine, methionine is kind of helping you with that. But once you lose that, then it'll cause more damage. Less magnesium because again, magnesium is used in almost everything in the body, thousands upon thousands of processes, and most people they're pretty low magnesium already, right? So if you're a veteran and you're struggling with such exposures, during your time serving, that could be an issue. Some people have memory loss, sensory disturbances, mood instability, and some people get tremors. So if you have tremors, that's a big telltale sign, right, of someone having mercury. And again, I'm not sure what you did in the military, but because there's so many different jobs and everyone does a different thing, but maybe you could be a welder in the military exposed to some of these things, right? Because that does happen to actual welders. Maybe you do some kind of manufacturing in the military or do something with munitions, and this exposure can make you sick, right? And we often don't make that connection, and it's time to make these connections. So for the future, right, we could do a lot more to help our veterans. And maybe, hopefully within time, right, we have some very amazing program for once veterans get out, we detox them, we get them healthy, we up their vitamins and their minerals, and you just roll back into civilian life and just prosper and do well and not have these issues, right? And you can recover from PTSD and other illnesses, right? If you don't have a leg, I'm sorry, explosion happened, but at least the whole point is we could make it so your body's less toxic, so you can have a better overall positive view of the world, not being affected by these heavy metals, but you're not just toxic in how they affect the body, but they're very toxic in our thinking patterns too. Uranium, again, I mean, there's not much more to say about this, right? Everyone knows uranium is pretty toxic and it can kill you, right? But part of this is that it binds to phosphate groups and it messes with your ATP, so you have less energy. Big major thing is it causes kidney damage, which means you might need more electrolytes like potassium and sodium and magnesium. Again, we know it causes like severe DNA damage, so this might warrant more folate to fix the damage. Mineral disruption, less phosphorus because of the interface with phosphate, less calcium because again, the way it messes with your bones. I don't recall the exact mechanism, but it does interfere with, I think, your calcium signaling. Less magnesium, less potassium because of kidney. So again, right, cognitive dysfunction, neural inflammation, potential long-term neural degeneration. So in most of these, I have a link to the National Institute of Health if you want to learn more about these certain toxicities, because again, it's a lot, and I just want to focus on the mental health part of it, right? Tungsten is interesting because it's kind of similar in like molybdenum. We need molybdenum for detoxing a lot of things, so essentially it replaces molybdenum. This causes redox balance, causing more oxidative stress. This alters enzymes like sulfite oxidase, xanthine oxidase. I think to an extent it also affects aldehyde dehydrogenase, and then even alcohol dehydrogenase, which you need to detox and, just to detox various things, right? Even like medications. Mineral disruption, you have less molybdenum, right? Because it's, fighting for the receptors and it's replacing it. Iron metabolism interference, because again, you need to have molybdenum to help you indirectly with hepcidin, and hepcidin regulates how much iron you do absorb and you don't absorb, right? It's like a check and balance kind of thing. Possible copper imbalance due to competition, because those three of them will compete for the same receptors. Neurological effects, as far as we know, there are behavioral changes in animals, but in humans, we don't really know. But when it comes to humans, there could be potential neurodevelopmental disruptions, right? Nickel actually did a huge article on nickel, and yeah, I'll link it over there. But again, we're talking about the physical mental health part of it. It generates oxidative stress. I mean, they all do, right? It alters the way your DNA works because of the way it binds to the proteins like cysteine and histidine. It disrupts mitochondrial enzymes, so again, you feel less energy. Interferes with iron-dependent processes because nickel and the iron, they both compete for divalent metal transport 1. So you have less iron because of the competition, less zinc because you're trying to get rid of it, less calcium because I think indirectly there's a competition between calcium too, or either kicks out some calcium. Less magnesium because again, used for everything. Neurological effects, you can have headaches, allergies, asthma, and even hypoxia because it's a hapten, and it acts like an autoimmune-like reaction as it grabs onto your proteins like cysteine and histidine, and the body sees it as an enemy combatant, right? So your immune system activates to fight it, and it's kind of hurting itself in the process. But because it doesn't like nickel, it needs to get nickel out. So this could be cognitive impairment due to chronic exposure, increased neuroinflammation, digestive issues, constipation, IBS, Crohn's. Although it's not neurological, I put this in here because gut health can affect your brain health, vice versa. So it's important to, understand that. Like leaky gut and having lipopolysaccharides and toxins. Beryllium, this triggers chronic immune activation, induces granuloma formation, indirect oxidative stress via immune response. It also can deplete magnesium, less zinc. If you have beryllium, it'll be brain fog, fatigue, inflammation-driven cognitive issues, and as you're noticing a pattern, this all affects you mentally. And they're all very similar, and it's difficult, right? So you can't exactly just pick and choose one, right? Unless you go do some good testing with a good doctor, you do blood testing, you do a urine test, and you do a hair tissue mineral analysis to see what your body is trying to deal with and kick out. And in some cases, if you haven't begun detoxing and you don't have enough zinc and selenium in your body, along with molybdenum, you could just have it stored in your body and you're not even detoxing it, and you could get a test and it shows, you have nothing and you're fine. But what I've seen in clients, right, is once they start detoxing and then they do take a test, they can see then the body eliminating the stuff because these things can be stored in your tissue. They can be stored in your fat, they can be stored in your brain, they can be stored in your bones, as we know with the strontium, right? So it's important to understand this from a holistic point of view so you could better be equipped to deal with this if this may be affecting you, right? And if you're a doctor and you're watching this, you're probably thinking, you know what, yeah, that's the biggest issue. You test for people, but they don't have enough minerals in your body to actually do the detox, their phase 1, phase 2 detoxification. So the stuff never really leaves the body, so you don't really detect it in the urine test, and a blood test, and a hair tissue mineral analysis. Then you have strontium, the next calcium, integrating strontium into bones and calcium signaling, alters neuronal excitability. You might be a little hyper, a little ADHD in a sense. You can disrupt neural calcium signaling if it's too much. You'll have less calcium as a result because they compete for the same receptors. Less magnesium, because again, you do need magnesium in the way you have your calcium signaling. Neurologically speaking, you have subtle changes in nerve signaling, potential contribution to dysregulation when combined with other metals, right? So alone, it might not do much, but paired with others, it could be, a big clusterfuck. Aluminum, this promotes, again, oxidative stress. It binds to phosphate groups like other ones, disrupting ATP, less energy, the way your DNA is processed, right? Because you got to replicate. Activates microglia, which causes neuroinflammation. Interferes with iron transport. Again, minerals, less magnesium, iron dysregulation. I think, in a way similar to copper, there's some sort of interaction occurring. Calcium signaling disruption, phosphorus interference, neurological issues with memory. You can't remember as well as you could, and when it comes to learning things, you just, you like the short-term memory. That's usually what it's about. Cognitive decline, you're not as smart as you used to be. You don't pick up things as you used to as easily. You're very forgetful, and this is part of the neurodegeneration, right? And just as an aside, right, people that do a lot of aluminum deodorant, right, what we're finding out is they tend to have a lot of aluminum in the brain. So this means it could bypass the blood-brain barrier either easily or enough over time will eventually make it in there. And this is why people are getting those, it'll lose him right now, but I believe they're getting that amyloid plaque in their brain. And some studies say there's an effect, some studies say there's not an effect. I don't really know, I don't really care, right? The point being is people with Alzheimer's or dementia, they're finding aluminum, and that's a big issue. Copper in high amounts. Free copper can become a pro-oxidant due to the fentanyl-like reactions, causing more reactive oxygen species, aka inflammation. Imbalance disrupts dopamine metabolism. Again, if unbound, right, it doesn't have the ceruloplasmin, which keeps it safe. I think even cysteine, to an extent, plays a protective role. That could be an issue. Which, when you make the connections based on like nickel and some of the other metals, especially like mercury, because it binds to thiols, which is going to be like cysteine, and I think in some cases it'll be methionine. You could have copper in you that becomes more oxidative because it's lacking those sort of chaperones in a way that kind of protect it from itself. And again, if you have high copper, you generally have less zinc, so you need more zinc, especially if you have these metals already and you're trying to like detox because your body wants zinc to do the detoxing. You could be low already because you're dealing with a lot of things at once. Iron metabolism disruption, because again, you got to balance copper with all these. Same thing with molybdenum. And with copper, high copper, right? It's going to be anxiety, it's going to be mood swings, it could be neurodegeneration when unbound, and there could be a dopamine imbalance. So when it comes to copper, I want you to know, right? It's going to always be some kind of anxiety. It's always anxiety when it comes to copper. One thing I noticed with my clients, they just, they take, I've had people come to me that take copper pills, right? And then they've just become full of anxiety and they never had anxiety in their life. It's due to the body having too much copper and maybe you have copper water pumps or eat copper-rich foods, and eventually there's a lot of copper in your body, and maybe you're vegan vegetarian, maybe you don't eat a lot of meat. Point being, right, is you're lacking zinc, and you need zinc to keep copper in check. Antimony interferes with cellular respiration, aka the way your mitochondria produces ATP for energy, inhibits key enzymes similar to arsenic-like behavior, increases oxidative stress, so you have less selenium because you're trying to detox and, they compete for the same receptors. Less zinc, less sulfur compounds, which you need for glutathione, of course. Neurological effects like headaches, dizziness, and cognitive dysfunction due to chronic exposure. So how did this all put together? How does it all bind together, right? So altogether, you might have this amalgamation of a toxic heavy metal soup, right? If you're in the military and you have certain roles that expose you to many things, or maybe it's just one thing, right? I don't know, right? Because everyone's different. But point being is, this may damage the mitochondria, leading to less ATP, so you have less energy for your brain to work well, for neurons to function and fire up, and even your overall, your health, right? This disrupts neurotransmitters that balance mental health, so again, it's disrupting dopamine, which you need to feel decent, you get decent mood, motivation, good. Glutamate is used a lot for detoxing, actually. So in some cases, if you're not very excitable, you're very glum, you're not really stimulated, right? It could be a lack of glutamate. Also, no glutamate and GABA. They have a relationship together, and GABA calms you down. It stands for gamma aminobutyric acid, and usually your body will produce extra GABA when you're calm and or when you're trying to fall asleep as you increase more melatonin. So again, right, due to all these things, right, if you're affecting your microglia, it stays on, which means it's going to promote the risk of neurodegeneration. And the most important thing of all, right, and what I find to be incredibly insidious is how they can bioaccumulate in your body. So although you come home from battle, right, you come home from war, you come home, you're done with your tour, right, you come home and maybe you don't have a breaking point right there, right? Maybe your breaking point is going to be a year or 10 years from now, right? If you don't get healthy, right? So point being, right, is your body wants to protect you, and the way your body protects you, if you ain't got the resources to detox this stuff, is it's going to put it in your brain, it's going to put it in your fat tissue, and some of them it's going to be in your bone. And one day, when the stress bucket is so full, it's going to come out, and it might manifest as a different kind of disease. So heavy metals, right? This could be something inhaled, right? Especially gunpowder. It could be eaten, right? I think there was something about MREs having some kind of metals in them. It can be absorbed through the skin, right? Because again, right, whatever your skin can absorb, your body will, take in. I'm gonna take some water. I'm talking too much. I'm trying to hurry this up because I could go on for hours. Okay. So burn pit smoke, the thing about burn pits is you're burning fucking everything. You're just trying to get rid of everything all at once, right? And it's not going to be clean, right? Because again, you're throwing everything in there: metals, medical waste, chemicals, deoxins, plastics, particulates, right? Because you're breathing all that stuff, right? Petroleum, you're breathing in fuel, right? Jet fuel too, benzene, poop, right? Munitions. I mean, It's a chemical cocktail of smoke you don't want to be around. And it's no fucking mystery why people get sick that were attending these burn pits, and that was their job to do, right? So eventually, over time, people fought, and Congress listened, right? In 2022, they passed the PACT Act, and this has expanded the veterans' health care and the benefits for people exposed to the burn pits and other toxic substances. And if you have any of these cancers, it's because you were exposed to this burn pit, right? So we're talking about brain cancer like glioblastoma, GI cancer, head neck cancer, kidney and bladder ureter cancer, blood cancer, leukemia, lymphoma, melanoma, pancreatic cancer, reproductive cancer, right? Men, testicular, prostate, women, ovarian, respiratory, breathing cancers of any type, because again, you're breathing this thin, right? If you want more list of cancers, this may have been you, right? This link is here. Let me fix this so it's going to be like a cool link. Oh, it's hyperlinked. Okay. And again, right? If you have one of these disabilities, if you served in Southwest Asia, right? So it's going to be Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Somalia, United Arab Emirates, and other countries in the Middle East, right? From August 2nd of 1990 to the present, you could be eligible. If you're, in Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Syria, Djibouti, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, or Yemen from September 11, 2001 to the present, you may be eligible, right? And even in the past, if you filed for compensation and you were denied, you could then file again, right? And you should get benefits. So again, right, even if it's just not cancers, right? It could be asthma, bronchitis, COPD, rhinitis, sinusitis, bronchiolitis, emphysema, granulomatous disease, interstitial lung disease, pleuritis, pulmonary fibrosis, and sarcoidosis. Now, if you're a veteran exposed to burn pits, you can click that link below to apply for benefits, because some people, like I said, right, this happens years later, right? You could have a breaking point. It's not always going to usually be something instantaneous. Maybe you don't feel good right away, but, humans are interesting, right? When we feel like shit, we just say we're tired and we move on. So humans are pretty hardy, but, in a sense, we kind of neglect and shrug it off, but this could be a really big issue. So again, right, if you were in a burn pit and you served and, you got something related years later, you probably finally hit the breaking point in your health, and then you got, these symptoms or diseases, right? So again, right, file a claim and get some help, right? Because, again, right, this is the least, the government can do for you because you served. Then you have jet fuel and solvents. It's going to be benzene, hydrocarbons, toluene, xylene, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, and organophosphates. So according to a congressional military study, they looked at the pilots and the ground crews, and air crews had 87% higher rates of melanoma, skin cancer. Men were 60% likelier to get prostate cancer, and women just as much to also get breast cancer. This is compared to other service members, right? So if you're working on a base, on an air base, right? If you're working on an aircraft carrier, you could be exposed to these things, right? And that may increase your risk of cancer. So the thing about jet fuel is that it's not just regular fuel, it's a complicated mixture. And again, you gotta burn it so aircrafts can fly, and they're pretty heavy. Aircrafts vary in how much fuel they carry and burn. F-35, depending on its variants, can carry about 18,250 pounds of fuel. Because we're Americans, that's going to be 2,720 gallons of fuel. I mean, some people have a car with like a, 10, 12, 15, maybe even a 20-gallon tank, right? If you have a truck, it's like, and this burns like 11.3 gallons of fuel a minute to fly for like 3.5, 4 hours. So I can only imagine if you're a ground crew, right, work on an aircraft carrier or a base, and these jets are going off, and, you're breathing in basically a much more potent amount of car exhaust than, like, let's say you gas up every week, right? Imagine the entire time you're using your car, you breathe that in like a minute or two, right? So again, this is concerning, right? This is Small particles, smoking is bad because you're inhaling small particles, and again, right, you're inhaling small particles consisting of benzene and toluene and xylene and who knows other stuff, right? Because I know not all fuels are the same, some aircrafts are different, you know. So again, right, you don't really know what you're breathing in all the time. Then you have pesticides and nerve agents. Many militaries use pesticides and nerve agents belonging to the same chemical family of organophosphates and carbamates. This means they're using chemistry to kill insects, right? But by the same token, it's also the same in some cases, right, for chemical warfare. So again, right, for mosquito control, lice and flea protection. I know some of these are different names, right? You got permethrin, diazinon, malathion, chlorpyrifos, chlorpyrifos. And the thing is, you're applying it to your skin, DEET, right? You're applying, this permethrin to your uniform. Your bed net is treated with that. And of course, you have antimalarial, medication. It's not a big deal, right? But I'm talking about like these chemicals you're exposed to, right? Even your MREs, 100% contain pesticides, 95% had glyphosate, 100% contain heavy metals, with a crazy amount of aluminum. So we could already make a connection, right? And as a military member, that's what? That's a big percentage. Like a crazy high percentage. And this is all of them. And yeah, it would make sense why people are having PTSD and brain related issues, mental health issues, because, even if you weren't doing any of those ground crew stuff or were even like, in the field shooting weapons and blowing things up and you were just in an office, but if you were eating MREs, right, then, already you have like aluminum contamination that could be affecting you, right? So again, right, like it matters what your roles are, where you've been, what you've done. You may be exposed to some things, maybe not, right? It's all different for everybody. But yeah, the fact that MREs are contaminated is a really big issue. So pesticides, why are they bad? People bitch about, glyphosate and, paraquat and atrazine about gay frogs, which is, I mean, it's a funny way to put it, but the male frogs did turn female, right? Like their balls turn into, you know, the female parts. So, this is a big issue, right? We're humans, so we kind of ignore it because we're bigger animals. But the thing is, both pesticides and nerve agents target the same enzyme known as acetylcholinesterase, right? The job of this enzyme is to break down acetylcholine to stop nerve signals after they fire, right? So on off, right? On off. But these pesticides inhibit acetylcholinesterase, which prevents a breakdown of acetylcholine, which means your nerve signals are going to keep firing, even though you don't want them to, right? So acetylcholine builds up uncontrollably, your nerves keep on firing, and your symptoms may look like constant muscle twitching, could be seizures, trouble breathing, paralysis. It depends, right? This is different for everybody. And I just want to make it clear, right? Every war, right, has something toxic that has affected our soldiers, right? So again, right, Vietnam with Agent Orange and the whole rainbow, it wasn't just orange. There was like a ton of different experiments that were working on these pesticides, insecticides. Even napalm with styrene, exposure to styrene is toxic. World War II with Imperial Japanese using mustard gas and bluicide against the Chinese. As we know, Nazis with Zyklon B and the creation of sarin and taboon, even though I don't think they ever used it. World War I was kind of crazy, right, with the gas warfare. It started with the phosgene and chlorine and mustard gas, and yeah, I mean, we have a history of using chemical warfare, and I think this even goes back even further back in time, right? But again, right, here you have a normal transmission, right? You get the neuron receiving neuron, acetylcholine, it's activated, it goes, and it stops it when it doesn't need it, right? But if you're exposed to these pesticides, right, this thing doesn't, shut it down, right? So this is always on, firing, and working, right? So imagine running on a treadmill and you just cannot stop no matter what, right? That's kind of what's happening to your neurons, right? Like, they gotta take a break too, right? Everyone's gotta rest. So this could be what's causing certain neurological issues in people, right? Sort of dysfunction. And the thing is that everyone exposed to high levels of pesticide, it's never usually acute. It takes time, right? Little by little, gradually over time, it builds up in your body, it accumulates, you're not really detoxing it, and then one day you just hit a breaking point, right? Because that's usually what happens. You have a chronic overstimulation of neurons, receptor desensitization, neuronal damage over time, causing brain fog, memory loss, slow cognition, you start thinking a bit slower, you're not as fast and snappy as you used to be. Then you have the microglia, immune activation, releasing cytokines, which in some people can cause depression, anxiety, mood instability, damages the mitochondria, causing more oxidative stress, messes with your energy production so you feel more tired, your muscles are weaker, your recovery from just doing regular things is, even harder. Autonomic nervous system dysfunction, and this is the big issue I see, right? Usually, in my opinion, this is due to a deficiency in B vitamins like B1, deficiency in B5, deficiency in magnesium, not getting proper amounts of melatonin at night due to blue light, so you have trouble trying to calm down and sleep and chill. It could also be high copper, making it harder for you to relax, because you want to relax and be in the parasympathetic rest and digest mode, right? And the thing is, some people are stuck in fight or flight mode, right? Like the battle never turned off, right? They're just like always in that zone of trying to survive and live, and that's when people sort of get these really big issues, right? Because then you can't calm down and rest and chill and relax. So this is when you have heart rate irregularities, right? Digestive issues, chronic stress state, and again, right, oxidation, it damages everything in the body and your signaling, and your proteins can even be misfolded, and this causes issues down the line. So this is going to affect everything in your body. Endocrine, which is going to be, your hormones, reproductive system, right? Nervous system, your breathing, your heart, your kidneys. This could become, infertility, diabetes, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's disease, asthma, COPD, atherosclerosis, coronary artery disease, renal failure, and kidney disease, right? Because again, these things aren't good for you. So how is this related to PTSD? PTSD is known for lower stress threshold, dysregulated neurotransmitters, and impaired cortisol signaling. So the brain becomes more reactive and less resilient as the amygdala, right, becomes more sensitive. Your fear center, right, becomes overactive with heightened threat perception. It makes it easier for someone to be triggered by something, going into fight or flight mode. Much in the same way a veteran may be watching a movie and they hear bombs go off or an explosion and they get triggered and, they start reacting. Or they hear a gunshot whiz and they turn and they're like, back in fight or flight mode and they're trying to survive, right? They get that fear because of the way their amygdala has been impacted. They have reduced prefrontal cortex control, makes it harder to regulate emotions with poor impulse control, and this makes it difficult for veterans to calm down once they get triggered with their PTSD. And this is why we've seen a lot of veteran suicides. They can't, talk themselves down, they can't see a path forward, they can't think of good things, they're overwhelmed by negative things because, again, their prefrontal cortex has this issue, and their amygdala has this issue. So they're just living in fear, and they can't be happy, right? No matter how much they try, no matter how much therapy you fucking give them, right? They're not going to get better. Especially if they're still drinking and smoking and maybe doing drugs, right? I mean, because that's kind of what happens when you go down that bad route. But what I'm trying to do, right, is I'm talking about this, right? The question that becomes, how do we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, right? And this is what I'm going to talk about in my second post next week. Because again, I'm still laying foundation, but the whole point is we got to detox heavy metals, right? And be healthy and eat healthy and, do some sweating in a sauna, exercise, and doing all these things, right? So you could then live a healthier life by removing toxicities that make you toxic. And again, right, impaired neuroplasticity is an issue because it reduces the ability for people to move on from trauma. And I argued that people are stuck in fight or flight mode, right? Veterans, they're not weak and they're not pathetic, right? They've gone through some shit. They've gone through a lot of things. normal people wouldn't ever go through. But when you're exposed to these toxic substances, you become a different person, you know? How do you detox all these things? You would be, the cool, amazing you who you're supposed to be. But you're being, affected by these neurological agents like heavy metals and other toxic substances you were exposed to. And this gives us the idea that we gotta give further care to our veterans because it's never that simple, right? But I want to make it that simple. So again, here you have the overlap between PTSD and TBI. I believe they both are related, right? PTSD, you get the flashbacks, you're kind of a loner, you avoid things, you're always hyper aware because you never know if shit goes down. You get the nightmares. Some people may fear apathy or they have this emotional numbness they have issues with. TBI is going to be a lot more physical, right? Nausea, headaches, dizziness, your vision is kind of messed up. You're very sensitive to light and sound because, again, you got impacted in the head. And they all, in common, right, can have fatigue, irritability, cognitive defects, insomnia, depression, and anxiety. And my point is, in this overlap, right, is it exposure to mercury? Is it also exposure to, I don't know, lead, beryllium, tungsten, aluminum? It could be a lot of things impacting you, right? Especially when you pair heavy metals with pesticides and you go together, so it's already messing up your acetylcholine receptor and your ability to, detox and maneuver through, you know, this this process of the brain where your neurons are firing, and altogether it becomes this clusterfuck. But just because it's a clusterfuck doesn't mean you can't do anything about it. You can definitely do a lot about it, and we're going to talk about this, a lot of it, in part 2, right? And I want to give people hope that you're not fucked. Like you got a way forward. You can detox this shit. Some people go to like a sauna and like, man, they're all black, or they start sneezing like, like black stuff, and it's actually like you got this stuff stuck in your body, right? And it's time to do detoxes and be healthy. Because again, these things, right? You got what? Manganese, you got lead, you got what? Arsenic, you got cadmium, you got mercury. It goes through your blood-brain barrier directly straight into the brain, causing, again, neurological diseases. Not sure about autism later in life, but Alzheimer's, memory impairment, cognitive disability. And it's going to be lead usually. Because again, right, I believe everyone is forced to go to the range, if I'm correct, and to like shoot a certain amount of times, right? So, I mean, you're shooting rounds and you're breathing in lead, and, over time it becomes an issue until you have a breaking point. So this is going to be headaches, irritability, reduced sensations, aggressive behavior, and difficulty sleeping. And although it's more harmful to children, it doesn't mean it's not going to not affect an adult, right? Many toxic compounds don't just pass through the body, but many are lipophilic, which means it accumulates in your brain, and your fat cells, and certain tissues, and your bone, depending on what it was, right? And when detox is not sufficient enough, they may accumulate over time, right? In research, the word is bioaccumulate because it's stuck in your body over time growing. And short term, like putting this in the fat cells are good because it's protecting you. Because you can't detox everything all at once. If you did, you would just die, right? Because it's overwhelming. So the body's smart. It knows to lock this in place. So one day when you stop drinking, you stop smoking, you start eating healthier, you start doing better things for your health, it's not going to impact you. But over time, right, if you, on the other end of the spectrum, right, and you're not eating healthy, you're eating a bunch of junk food and fast food, and you're drinking and you're smoking, right, then it's going to stay in your body longer term until the breaking point, and then things get a little more nastier. But regardless, there's always a path forward to move on. So again, right, no matter where you are or how unhealthy you are, there's always going to be a way to get healthier, right? It might take longer for some people, right? But the point is, you will, by doing the right things, come back out on the other side, which I will explain in my future article, and I'll link you some other articles you could do for the main time, right? Because to do nothing is to just wallow. To do something, at least fail, at least you give it an attempt, right? So it's really important to give attempts to become better and to want to do better because you can't break out of this. So Again, this inflammation happens. It creates a condition over time. This described as a chronic toxic burden. Their detox is overwhelmed, and then it breaks. And but again, right? Like there is not going to be a cute little lemonade cleanse. That's bullshit, right? This is a nutrient and mineral based approach by which the liver undergoes phase 1, phase 2 detoxification, along with the intermediary part between phase 1 and phase 2. You can argue phase 3 is where you eat a little more fiber, you take a binder, maybe some charcoal, depending on what your issue is, then you poop it out. And you don't recirculate that through your enterohepatic recirculation, so you're not like retoxing again. You're pooping out what's affecting you. And for some people, right, this could, in some cases, right, I've argued, it could manifest as kind of fatty liver or fatty organs. Because again, the fat around it is going to protect you from those metals, right? That's where they can be stored sometimes. So again, how do these toxins disrupt the human body? There's many toxins. They cause inflammation. And we got over a lot of examples, right? Lead from shooting, burn pit pollutant exposure, diesel exhaust. Again, damages your mitochondria. It can result in chronic fatigue, muscle weakness, and neurodegeneration. It's one of the ideas behind Gulf War syndrome, in which veterans were exposed to a variety of toxins. I believe there was I forget the name, right? It's a weird foreign name, right? But they blew up some military depot when they were over there, and sarin gas was released, and some veterans were exposed to it. Pesticides, as we talked about, sprayed on tents and uniforms. I mean, it's one thing to just spray it on you, but to live in it in your uniform and where you're lodging, then you're constantly exposed to it more than the average person. Burning oil wells, again, you're breathing that in. But just as a quick aside, bring it together, because I do know there was a lot of former veterans that served in the Gulf War. They got out and they're kind of fucked up in some ways, but because there is this link to pyridostigmine bromide, PB, this pill that they took, right? It's an anti-nerve gas pill, which is now thought to be a neurotoxin. Back then, I mean, this is used in certain medications for some diseases. But again, right, if you're taking a medication for a disease you don't have, you could cause issues, and that's what happened. There was wishful thinking. The idea was, if you took PB before being exposed to sarin gas, you block your receptor, so sarin gas wouldn't go to the receptor, which is, smart, right? But again, right, they're finding out that veterans who took more than 21 PB pills were more likely to have issues down the line years later. And I want to make it a point that it's never just one thing, right? It's always a multitude of things that are going to affect you, right? So if you're in a Gulf War and, you might have been exposed to nerve agents like sarin, PTSD, maybe something happened, right? It's going to, affect you. Pyridostigmine bromide, right? You take over 21 pills or even, a decent amount, you might have issues with your acetylcholine receptor. Burn pit exposure, again, toxic smoke from every kind of waste you could imagine being breathed in. You could have had infectious disease, which I'm going to put that a little lower on the list as a big issue, but again, you never know if you got something exotic, right? So when it comes to pyridostigmine, significantly associated with higher amounts of depression, crying, trouble sleeping, lack of energy. The results are consistent with previous reports with about 250,000 Gulf War veterans. This suggests that PB was a causal factor of, Gulf War illness. It affects about 30% of veterans. It includes fatigue, you're tired, your brain and mood are affected, pain in your muscles and your bones, GI issues, issues with breathing, skin rashes. And the veterans that did have more PB, that took more PB pills, had a lot more of these issues. And some people may have had myocardial infarctions, heart attack, diabetes, and chronic fatigue syndrome. So as I explained, right, PB reversibly binds to the same cholinergic receptor as nerve agents such as sarin and soman, causing the receptors to be unavailable for these nerve agents as a form of protection. Unfortunately, safety was assumed. There's a waiver involved, right? But some things just don't work out the way they're supposed to work out, right? And as we know, similar to the pesticides we talked about, it's an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, which inactivates the acetylcholine enzyme, preventing the breakdown of acetylcholine. So this builds up over time in the muscarinic and nicotinic cholinergic receptors and has been shown later with cognitive, muscle, and sleep dysfunction. And now they're finding out that oligodendrocytes have now been shown to have functional cholinergic receptors that are affected by COL4-related acetylcholinesterase enzyme inhibition, suggesting this could have affected your brain myelination. So in your neurons, you have something called these myelin sheaths, and they're the protective ends of your neurons. Uh, this may have damaged the neurons, and people are going to have, issues, various issues, depending on, their mental issues and stuff like that, because, it affects a lot of things in the body, right? But if that's the issue, I would say kind of similar to helping people with diabetes, with peripheral neuropathy. You want to take your B vitamins, your minerals, you want to eat healthy as possible. You want to do low carb, keto, carnivore, whichever works best with your own body. And ideally, hopefully, right? And you need fat, right? Here's the thing. There's a big demonization against fat, Fat's not bad. Look at my last post, my last article, as I talked about that. Point being, you do need saturated fat. You do need healthy fats, right? To help you with the rebuilding of your myelin sheath. Because your myelin sheath needs fat, your myelin sheath needs cholesterol, and that helps you with that specific issue. So if you were exposed to, PP pills, sarin gas, this could activate microglia and astrocytes. These are your brain's immune cells. And this could lead to chronic inflammation, causing, again, more issues. There was also indication that, although not statistically significant, which I think is bullshit, right? Because when you're affected, right? I don't give a fuck what the numbers say. Because if you're affected, you're 100% affected, right? Like you can't just, like I'll never downplay someone's illness, because people have an illness and you gotta help them, right? So again, right, not everyone was specifically affected by PB, right? But overall, toxic exposures over time could affect the body, and these issues then occur, right? So again, similar to pesticides, this is what could have happened to your acetylcholine receptors, and again, right, we could work on this. So here's the thing, right? If you want to start somewhere, please read my guide here. I wrote this going a very certain way, but then I wrote this thinking this could be steps from the beginning to the end in your health journey to pick up all the pieces and to heal as best as possible. And I say this because people will jump around, right? Some people don't do the diet, some people do the exercise, some people don't do the exercise, but they do the diet and do the supplements. Some people do the supplements, but they don't do the diet, and they're still exposed to things that are toxic in the environment. So again, right, it's a series of steps to help you reduce exposures to unnecessary inflammation, so you can then help your body heal, and the foods you do eat that are healthy and nutritious for you, and supplements you do take, will eventually help you have a healthier body and less inflammation, so you can be healthier. Because I see a lot of people that come to me and they do some things right, but they skip some steps. Some people do some things wrong and they skip some steps. So really it's a matter of dotting your I's, crossing your T's, so as you're getting healthier, you're at least on the best right track. And the rest of my Patreon, these articles I wrote, right? If you need extra support, you can then read those articles to then give you that extra support, right? So I want to consider this to be my master guide, because it gives people a sense of what they need to do, right? So again, glutathione is really important, especially, in this detox, right? And your exposure to heavy metals and all these things, right? This is your body's master antioxidant and detox molecule. Glutathione is a tripeptide of glycine, glutamine, and cysteine. Glutathione, as an antioxidant, neutralizes oxidative stress from free radical oxidants and non-radical oxidants to reduce inflammation. Again, right, whether you're exposed to benzenes or PFAS or heavy metals or whatever, right, you need to rebuild more glutathione to help you reduce inflammation and to detox. Toxins will consume glutathione during detox. Heavy metals bind to sulfur groups like cysteine, which impacts the creation of glutathione. It's also part of phase 2 detox through the glutathione conjugation pathway. So if you're overburdened with toxicity, this could cause an imbalance when it comes to detox because you need more glutathione. This can result in increased oxidative stress, poor toxin clearance, and heightened inflammation. This can then create a vicious cycle where more toxins accumulate to cause damage as there is not enough nutritional resources to detox them from the body. If you want to learn more about raising your glutathione levels and to reduce inflammation, to lessen your stress bucket, then click here. I'll add it when it's ready. So again, right, neurological damage, it's how your brain is targeted. Again, we talked about how your brain can accumulate these toxins. These things can cross through your blood-brain barrier, disrupting it. This could be very soft particulate matter from what you're breathing in. So if you're, breathing in all these heavy metals, right, through an aerosolized version of it, right, it's going to bypass you and go into your brain and cause, issues. Toxins and immune cells enter the brain. We start to see neuroinflammation, cognitive dysfunction, and increased risk of neurodegeneration. For that reason, right, of these aerosols from shooting guns and blowing up munitions and being exposed to these things. So again, we have microglia. They're the brain's immune cells that trigger chronic microglial activation, causing the release of inflammation, right? Interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha. Again, brain fog, depression, anxiety, your brain's also fighting that battle. And the thing I want to make clear to people, right, is your immune system has to be a single battalion fighting against an army of enemies. Hell, your immune system, if it has to, right, it'll be a one-man army against a whole army. And it will fight no matter what. So we got to give your body the vitamins, the minerals, the fatty acids, the amino acids you need to call into reinforcements so your immune system can fight these things, detox them, and get better. So once you get healthier and you start taking supplements that are going to help you with what you need, you call in reinforcements, you open your supply line, you get your numbers up, you get your tanks, air superiority, naval support, you get some JSOC going in there, you get the whole 9 yards. But the point is, reinforcements take time and they don't show up instantaneously, right? It's a matter of doing what you can. So again, your neurotransmitters are disrupted, low motivation, depression, addiction, serotonin, because you're trying to feel better, so you're doing what you can. Mood instability, anxiety, issues with your acetylcholine from pesticides. Again, organophosphates, as we talked about, inhibits your neuronal firing, brain dysfunction, memory problems, as we see in Gulf War veterans. You then have endocrine hormone disruption, right? Because many of these toxins act as endocrine disruptors, which cause a hormonal imbalance to your body. This can affect your mood, energy, and stress on a hormone level. So some of these endocrine disruptors are PFAS, dioxins, PCBs. They will mimic or block hormones interfering with your thyroid, messes with your testosterone, women messes with your estrogen and progesterone balance, and dysregulates your cortisol balance. So this can look like fatigue, weight gain, low testosterone, thyroid function. This could be from flame retardant stuff. This could be from pesticides. It could be from PFAS and phthalates if you consume of water that's contaminated, like like Lejeune. Plastics too. So again, toxic exposure can push your immune system into dangerous ways. Chronic inflammation with persistent immune activation and elevated cytokine levels, or immunosuppression. So the thing is, heavy metals will alter your immune cell signaling. You could have gut damage from leaky gut, which may cause immune activation due to endotoxins like lipopolysaccharides and negative gram-bacteria. Oxidative stress further the immune system, which may result in autoimmune conditions, chronic infections, and allergy sensitivity. I'll link it here. I have an article about leaky gut and what to do about it. Because again, right, these pesticides will cause this issue specifically. And as we know, to an extent, a lot of serotonin is produced in, your intestines. And if you're having this issue with your gut, this can also affect your mental health, right? So in that way, they're also related. PTSD is often seen as purely psychological due to traumatic experience, but toxic exposure can prime your brain for failure. So you have your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. It could be dysfunction of how your body will process and use stress, cortisol. HPA controls stress hormones like cortisol. Toxins can disrupt cortisol signaling. Chronic inflammation overstimulates the stress pathway, resulting in hypervigilance, anxiety, and poor stress tolerance. As we talked about with the PTSD, neuroinflammation increases your amygdala sensitivity and reduces your prefrontal cortex control. So your fear response can be exaggerated greatly, and you can have vast emotional dysregulation in which it's hard to control your emotions. Again, we talked about impaired neuroplasticity. Your brain's ability to adapt is reduced because you have less brain-derived neurotropic factor, and your neurons lose flexibility, in some cases even the energy it needs. So this is what makes it a difficult barrier to overcome, and that trauma, in a sense, becomes locked in at an impasse which you can't go through because you're trying to recover from stress, and it becomes difficult because of these heavy metals and these toxins people were exposed to when they were serving. And it's hard to, diagnose because, again, right, fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, depression, hormonal issues, chronic pain, this is like the most generic shit ever, right? You go to a doctor and they're like, well, that could be anything, right? Like, it's not a smoking gun. And that's the thing, some doctors are looking for a smoking gun. And, we just chalk it up to a bit stress, right? It's just stress, right? No big deal, You're just working a lot or, you just, haven't been sleeping. So we tend to be very dismissive of symptoms. And at some point, they turn into something even more worse. And, I'm not trying to blame anyone, right? There's no one to blame because, again, right, this is why I wrote this article. You read this article, you serve, you know where you've been, where you haven't been, you know what you were exposed to. You could pinpoint, I might have been exposed to these certain heavy metals or these certain chemicals, and you could then make these connections in your brain and get proper help, right? Because again, right, your doctor didn't serve the way you served. Your doctor didn't experience the experiences you have, right? So you are your own best support in overcoming your health issues because you know what you've been through. So unless it's serious disease like cancer, most of these symptoms are just written off. A lot of standard lab testing looks normal because no one's looking for heavy metals. No one's looking for toxins. No one's looking for pesticides. No one really cares about endocrine disruptors, unless your testosterone's low, but then they'll just slap you on some fucking TRT, and that doesn't really help you because you didn't fix the root cause of why your thyroid or your testosterone was low, right? And like I say, it's no one's fault, and a lot of these things are cumulative toxic exposures. They're going to be a multi-system disruption. But at least probably since 2019, the DoD has been working to protect and reduce soldiers' exposures to heavy metals by replacing them with other things. Hopefully they're not more toxic in the same way they banned BPA, but the other BPs, bisphenols, were even more toxic. So, it's a funny world we live in. So the synergy effect, why multiple toxins are worse, it's because you gotta detox a lot more at once. It amplifies neurotoxicity, these heavy metals and pesticides. Your burn pit smoke, your perfluoral and polyfluoral alkalis, they impact immune system function and endocrine disruption. The reason this is all terrible at once is because you're competing for mineral resources in detox. Cytochrome P450 requires nutrients to grab onto these toxins to go through an immediate reaction and to conjugate them. There's 6 different pathways for detox. Once they're conjugated, it goes into the bile, goes into your poop, you then poop it out. And oxidative stress can be increased if the body's lacking minerals like zinc, selenium, molybdenum, B vitamins, and electrolytes. So compounded mitochondrial damage can be accrued over time as the body accumulates more toxins than it could detox. So again, this is just some stuff here. But I'll do a much more comprehensive guide on this because not everything works for everything, right? That way you have something a little more direct, a little more targeted. Final thoughts: invisible wounds. Veterans are not just exposed to trauma, but you're exposed to biological stressors that alter how the brain and body function at a cellular level. PTSD, fatigue, hormonal dysfunction, and neurological issues, they're not separate conditions, but interconnected consequences of toxic exposure, inflammation, and disrupted physiology. For many veterans, the battlefield never ended truly. It continued in their brain, in their cells, in their fats, and their biology long after they return home. They don't know it. Something's off, but they feel it. So if you want to start, somewhere in your health, click here. It'll take you to a guide of how to navigate my Patreon. And again, I'm going to write a part 2 soon about how to detox, understand the mechanisms, and explain how to support your body by detoxing these toxins so you can live a better life and, hopefully recover and do better and you start to see strides. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. And here I'm going to make just a small list of things you might have been exposed to, right? Lead, antimony, barium, copper, nitroglycerin, nitroglycerin oxide, TNT, RDX, HMX, cyanides, formaldehydes, benzenes. Just a lot of things you might have been exposed to, right? Nitroglycerin, tungsten, copper, right? If you're related to heavy weapons and tank shells, aircraft, weaponry, missile systems, perchlorates, right? Aluminum, beryllium, titanium particles. Toxic releases from burning plastics, electronics, batteries, fuel combustions if you're burning things. And again, I have a supplement thing here, but again, like I say, right, I'm gonna make a part 2, and it'll be very more comprehensive, so you know what to do exactly. But again, thank you, right? It's been an hour and 10 minutes already, but I want to thank our veterans, our warriors, our brothers in arms, because people need to make these connections so they can get better help, right? Like I said, my goal is to one day have this information be so readily available and thought upon and known, especially by people that work for the VA or military doctors, that they can do the best to help save and heal, your brothers in arms. Because again, right, you come back from deployment with invisible wounds, and you sacrifice a lot to protect us, and we need to help you guys. And part of this starts with education to, be healthy, to exercise. I'm more focused on the exercise part for people that need to detox by sweating, right? But the one thing I do want to point out is everything starts with the diet, it starts with your gut, and it starts with eating nutrient-rich foods that'll then help you detox. And please like, share, subscribe, because I want you guys to take this information and to use it to your benefit, to improve your life. And, these are a bunch of guides I have that have written, that have helped a lot of people. If you want to have a consultation with me as your personal nutritionist, we could do a one-on-one personal strategy call so I can help you understand what health issues you have and what we can do about it, right? Because you can do something about your health through diet, nutrition, and supplements. You click this button to book a Calendly appointment with me. I think I charge $49 just for the strategy call. After that, I charge like $149 per session. Pretty affordable compared to a lot of other people that want to charge an arm and a leg for, a couple of months. So, yeah, I do have a lot more to say, but I've already gone over an hour and 10 minutes, and, I try to make this as short as possible. I was aiming for 40 minutes, and I overshot it. But, yeah, I just want you guys to take your time, go to my Patreon. I should have the link in the video below, and you could look at this for yourself, and you could do your own research and see what you were doing in the military, what you might have been exposed to, what you were working with, and how this could impact your own health. Because again, you got to do it yourself, right? No one's going to do anything for you. But I hope by making this issue more, I don't want to say readily available, right? But by making it more expansive and making a lot more connections to what could be affecting it, right? Your PTSD, your brain, your body, that these heavy metals and these pesticides and these things you were exposed to may be the primary majority cause of your health issues, and we can then work to help you detox. And just before I leave, I just want to tell you guys to, again, where's that article? Please click here for this article and start doing the right things to get healthier. And when my second part of this guide comes out, you can then know what to do exactly, much more precision-like, so you could, detox. So again, I want you guys to like and share. I support the veterans. I love our veterans. They do things a lot of us would never do, and they're brave for doing that. And whether you were in the office doing logistics, or you were actually fighting, or you were a reserve, I don't care. I thank you all equally for what you've done. And I've met a lot of veterans that talk about they weren't combat arms, but they didn't feel like they deserved it. But You guys give away your time and you give away service and you left your family, and regardless, you all deserve, our love, and our support, so you can better reintegrate into civilian life and live a better, awesome, amazing, happy quality of life that you deserve. Because I don't think mental illness should be taken unseriously. But if we package this together with these heavy metals and these toxic exposures during your time serving, and we link it together with PTSD and mental health issues and other health issues, then we could definitely make a connection that while you're getting help, there's a lot more you could do on the diet side to help you get healthier. There's a lot more you could do on the supplement side to help you get better. And there's a lot more you could do for yourself in terms of healing to detox these things and to finally get the life you deserve and live a better life. That's what it is, right? That's why I do what I do. I want people to live a happier, better life. Not just for you, right? But for your family, right? Your wife, your husband, your kids, your brothers, your sisters, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, right? They all love you very much, and I want to see you return home in peace and better spirits and in greater health. And if I help you do that, then I've done my part. Based off of you know God sending me to do what I can, right? So again, thank you guys. I love y'all. God bless y'all. Take it easy, and if you know a veteran, share this with a veteran because they deserve to watch this video to better understand their health and where they can improve upon. Okay, thank you and goodbye.